Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive with us. Are you ready to kind of ditch the GPS for a bit? We're going to explore ancient maps today, but we're not talking about the kind you'd pull out on like a road trip. We're going way, way back.
Think Paleolithic. You know, the time of woolly mammoths and those cave paintings you see in textbooks.
Oh yeah, exactly. And we're taking a deep dive today because of an article that really caught our attention called Lost for 13,000 Years. Scientists have finally decoded this ancient 3D map. I mean, can you imagine a map so old it predates the pyramids by a lot?
And what's really fascinating is that this wasn't found in some like far-off exotic location. This was discovered in France.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a site called Ségognole 3. And archaeologists were already familiar with this site. They were already working there.
Yeah.
Because there are these really beautiful horse engravings.
So they were looking at art and then stumbled on even older art hidden underneath. That's pretty amazing.
It is. It is. But this wasn't just a drawing. What they found was a section of the sandstone floor that had been deliberately sculpted. And it's not a map in the traditional sense. You know, it doesn't have neat lines showing borders or distances. Instead, think of it as like a three-dimensional model of a landscape. And it highlights the hills and valleys and, most importantly, how water flowed through it all.
Okay, wait, hold on. So they were mapping out water systems 13,000 years ago. I mean, was that even something on people's minds back then? I mean, I barely understand how plumbing works in my own house.
We have to remember, for Paleolithic people, understanding water wasn't about convenience. It was about survival. It was knowing where to find drinking water, where to hunt animals that gathered near water sources, and, you know, how to avoid things like flooding.
Yeah, that makes sense. So they were keen observers of their environment, but did they have a specific word for what we call hydrology today?
Well, we can't know for sure. But the way they sculpted the sandstone, it suggests a level of understanding that goes beyond just observation. They weren't just noting where water flowed. They were replicating how the whole system worked, showing how rainfall would gather in highlands, trickle down into streams, converge into rivers, and even form lakes and swamps.
So like they built a tiny functioning model of their whole water cycle right there on the floor of a cave.
Yeah.
That is some serious ingenuity, especially when you think about the tools they would have had back then.
Absolutely. And it changes how we think about Paleolithic people and their cognitive abilities.
Right.
Think about what this implies. They were aware of all these landscape features, but they were able to visualize them and then represent them in three dimensions. And that takes abstract thinking and spatial awareness.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting for me. The article mentions something about a female form also being carved nearby. So what's the story there?
Well, that's what makes this discovery so multifaceted. Near the 3D map, they found a sculpted female form. And get this, the way they engineered the water flow, it was directed to flow out from the pelvic area of this carving.
Wow, that's symbolic. They were connecting water with life, and the female form with the life-giving properties of water.
You're picking up on something important. The presence of this figure suggests that the map wasn't just a practical tool. It probably held deeper symbolic meanings as well. And, that connection between water and femininity, it's a recurring theme in a lot of cultures. Water often represents fertility, birth, the source of all life.
So we're looking at science and spirituality kind of blended together, like early engineering meeting ancient beliefs.
Exactly. This blurs the lines between practicality and symbolism, and it gives us a glimpse into the complex worldview of Paleolithic people. They weren't just concerned with survival. They were also trying to understand their place within the natural world. They imbued it with meaning and reverence.
It's incredible to think that a map, something that seems so straightforward, can have so much depth. And to think that it was hidden beneath our feet for 13,000 years, what else could be out there?
That is a great question, and something that we are going to get into further in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned, because we're going to be exploring even more about this remarkable discovery.
And we are back with the deep dive. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this incredible 13,000-year-old 3D map. Can you imagine having that kind of patience? To sculpt something so intricate, especially with the limited tools that they had way back then.
Yeah, it really speaks to their ingenuity and dedication, doesn't it? The article doesn't get into the specifics too much of their tools, but we can make some guesses based on what we already know about that era, the Paleolithic.
Yeah, okay, what kind of tools are we talking about?
So picture yourself back then, in the Paleolithic period. Metalworking hasn't even been invented yet. So your toolkit is basically stone, bone, and antler. Yeah, pretty much. So they probably used stone hammers and chisels. to chip away at the sandstone and shape the contours of their map.
So no fancy lasers or power tools.
No.
That's amazing how they were able to get such precision with such simple tools. I mean, I can barely hang a picture frame straight.
Well, their craftsmanship, it speaks to their understanding of the materials.
Right.
I mean, to shape sandstone so effectively, they had to know how it would fracture and erode over time. It's almost like they were collaborating with nature itself.
Yeah, wow. And speaking of collaboration, the article highlighted how important it was to have all these different experts working together to decipher the map. It wasn't just archaeologists, right?
You're right. It was archaeologists and geologists and even geomorphologists, all working together, combining their expertise. It's like a perfect example of interdisciplinary research. Because if they hadn't all worked together, who knows if we would have ever figured out the true meaning of the map.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. You need the archaeologists to understand the people who made the carvings and the geologists to analyze the sandstone itself, and then the geomorphologists to explain how those sculpted features reflect the actual landscape and the way the water would have moved.
Right, exactly. Like, just imagine if the archaeologists had found this alone. They probably would have recognized that the carvings were important. But without the other experts, I mean, the geologists and the geomorphologists, the full meaning of the map, it just never would have been uncovered. It just shows you the power of different perspectives coming together.
It's a good reminder for all of us that sometimes the best discoveries happen when we step outside our own little bubbles and work together, right?
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about the purpose of this map. Was it purely symbolic, or did it have a more practical function?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one that archaeologists are still debating. Some believe that it was meant to be educational, maybe to teach the younger generation about the surrounding landscape and the way that water flows.
That makes sense. What better way to learn than with a hands-on 3D model, right? Like a Palaeolithic version of virtual reality.
Exactly. And some think that it might have been used for rituals or ceremonies, especially ones related to water or fertility. Remember that female figure we talked about?
Yeah.
The fact that water was channeled to flow from that specific area, the pelvic area, it just strengthens that connection between the feminine form and water as a life-giving force.
So it was maybe a multi-purpose tool. I mean, it could have served both practical and symbolic needs at the same time.
Yeah, and for Paleolithic people, the line between practical and spiritual was probably pretty blurry anyway.
That's true. Their lives were so intertwined with the natural world, it makes sense that their understanding of it would be both scientific and spiritual at the same time. It's hard to put ourselves in that mindset today, but this map gives us a little glimpse into their worldview. So I have to ask, since we're talking so much about water, were there other landforms or features depicted on this map? I mean, did they only focus on rivers and streams, or did they go even deeper into the details?
Oh, they went deep. The map wasn't just this generic representation of water moving. I mean, they captured the actual topography of their region. The researchers have identified specific things like highlands and valleys, even areas where lakes and swamps would form.
So it wasn't just a water map. It was a replica of their entire world. In miniature?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And with that level of detail, I mean, that speaks volumes about how they related to the landscape. They weren't just passing through, they were rooted in this place. Imagine knowing every hill and valley, every twist and turn in the river. It was their home. And they clearly had deep respect for it and all of its complexity.
It's one thing to hear about it, but to imagine creating it, shaping the sandstone like that, to try to capture something so essential about your world. It's almost as if they were leaving a message for us, a message for future generations to say, hey, this is how we understood the natural world and this is where we fit within it.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. And that brings us back to that female figure. I think it's worth circling back because she adds such a profound layer to all of this.
I agree. She's not just an afterthought. She's integral to the whole thing. I mean, what are the prevailing theories about why she's there and why the water flows from that part of her body?
Well, remember how we talked about that recurring symbolism of water and femininity,
right?
Water being associated with fertility and birth and renewal, the very essence of life itself.
Yeah.
Well, in that context, some researchers think that the figure could represent a mother goddess, a deity that embodies all the creative and nurturing forces of nature.
Wow, a mother goddess watching over everything, keeping it fertile. It's a powerful image.
Yeah, it is. And remember, the water isn't just flowing randomly. It's intentionally channeled to flow from that one specific area, the pelvic area. It's just driving home that link between the feminine and water as life-giving.
It's like they were expressing their gratitude for nature's abundance and maybe even asking for continued prosperity for their people and for the land.
You got it. It's almost like a visual prayer. A way of honoring that sacred connection between humanity and the natural world. It's remarkable how something like a map can have so many layers, so much meaning, so much complexity.
It just reinforces that idea that this wasn't just some practical tool. This was a deeply symbolic object, something spiritual. It speaks to human creativity, our desire to connect to something bigger than ourselves.
And as we get into the final part of this deep dive, I want you to keep thinking about this. What other secrets does this map hold? What other layers of meaning might we uncover if we just keep exploring with open minds and a willingness to challenge what we think we know about the past? Stick with us, because there's so much more to unravel.
And we are back for the final part of our deep dive into this ancient 3D map. It's mind-blowing to think that something created 13,000 years ago can still teach us so much about the people who made it and how they saw their world.
It really shows us the power of human curiosity, doesn't it? I mean, this map isn't just some old relic. It's like a portal into a completely different way of thinking, a way of seeing the world where, like, science and spirituality were all woven together. And nature, it wasn't just something to exploit, it was something to respect.
It makes you wonder about our modern ideas of progress. With all our emphasis on technology and controlling nature, what other ways of knowing and being have we forgotten about?
It's a huge question. And this map, it really makes us confront it, because it challenges that whole traditional narrative about human progress. The idea that, our ancestors, they were somehow less intelligent, less sophisticated than us today.
Well, clearly that's not true at all, right? I mean, look at this map. They had incredible knowledge, skills that we're just beginning to understand again. To make this map, they had to know about hydrology, geology, engineering, even art. They were able to observe and analyze and then represent these super complex systems in so much detail. It's impressive.
And don't forget that symbolic side, too, adding that female figure and then directing the water flow like that. It tells us they were capable of abstract thought and a spiritual awareness that, honestly, most people just don't associate with Paleolithic people. They weren't just thinking about surviving. They were searching for meaning, connection in the bigger picture, in the web of life.
Almost like they were trying to pass their wisdom down through time, all the way to us. So what can we learn from all of this? How can we apply their insights to our lives today?
Well, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of observation. These map makers, they were so careful, so detailed in their observations. They were paying attention to all the little things, noticing patterns and connections that most of us would probably miss. In our world, it's so easy to get distracted, right? But that ability to really focus, to observe carefully, I think that's more valuable than ever.
It's like we need to slow down, tune in, and really see the world around us. The way things change with the seasons, the way water moves, how everything is connected.
Exactly. And another lesson, I think, is the power of working together. Collaboration. This discovery wouldn't have happened without archaeologists and geologists and geomorphologists all putting their heads together, sharing what they knew. It's easy to get stuck in our own little worlds, But this map reminds us that some of the biggest breakthroughs happen when people from different backgrounds and fields work together, when different ideas and perspectives come together.
It reminds me of that saying, 2 heads are better than one.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. The possibility of finding other ancient maps like this one. Do you really think that's possible, or is this discovery just a one-off?
It's hard to say for sure, but this discovery has definitely changed things, opened up a whole new way of thinking about it. We may have been overlooking similar sites all along because we just didn't know what to look for or how to understand them.
It's like this map has given us a new set of glasses to see the past with. Now we can see things more clearly, things we might have missed before.
That's a great way to put it. So who knows? Now that we know what to look for, there might be even older maps out there waiting to be found. That would really rewrite history, wouldn't it?
It's exciting to think about, and it just goes to show that our understanding of the past is always changing. New discoveries can pop up anytime, and that's what makes it so fascinating. It's a journey of discovery, full of surprises.
It really is. So to all our listeners out there, stay curious, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never be afraid to challenge what you think you know. Who knows what you might find?
This is The Deep Dive, signing off for today. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.